Good evening, and I hope your Monday is going well today. Welcome to Fresh Natural Life. We hope you've had a productive weekend and a productive Monday, or restful weekend, I should say, and a productive Monday. You know, the flu season is upon us, and I've been visiting with a lot of my patients and, making them aware of that. The recent pandemic has really opened my eyes a lot about the whole issue of flu season and a lot of things we need to do. As a cardiologist, I'm often focused on my patients' cardiovascular issues and the chronic illnesses. But what I have noticed over the years is that illnesses, worsen in a seasonal fashion. In the winter the fall and then the winter, individuals tend to, get sicker. We often think of, flu, upper respiratory tract infections and the like. COVID has heightened our awareness of that. But illnesses in general, can worsen or become exacerbated. This is the time of year I've known for a long time, and I frequently tell my patients, this is the time of year that people get sicker and hospitalizations tend to go up. The number one day for dying from heart disease is around Christmas Day. It's either Christmas Day or 1 or 2 days before or after from year to year. And so the issue is, why is that the case? We're going to talk about the history of flu seasons from a historical standpoint. But what I want you to think about as we go through this discussion is I want you to ask yourself the question, why? Because, we'll talk about it from a historical standpoint, but we'll also have some discussion as to why this may be the case. So we get flu season every year. We're going to look back at some of the histories of flu season, what's been worse flu season versus, some that are not as bad. And we'll try to put our current situation in the perspective of this history. So, the history of flu season, what have we gone through as a world community, if you will, and a national community, and what lessons can we learn from that history to help us prepare for this upcoming flu season. So I think you're going to really enjoy this show. Sit back and relax, and here we go. Hello, and greetings, everyone. I'm chuckling because I'm looking at some of the comments. Hello, Catherine Welch, Barbara Saunders. Hello, Bev Kelly, Marianne Blevins Watson, Nicole Boone. Hello, Deborah Payne, and Barbara Saunders. I love this question. Where does the flu go in the summer, and why didn't COVID go there too? I think that's going to be the question of the night. We'll try to answer that. But first of all, let me bring my friend and colleague on, Dr. Floyd Atkins. Hello, sir. How's it going?
I am doing fine today. How are you doing?
Oh, just fine. That's a great question to start off with. So where does flu go, and why didn't COVID go there too? Maybe it didn't know the way, huh?
Yeah. The regular flu season has some specific dynamics, so it disappears during the summer. But we've had other seasons where the regular flu season hung around, so it's not too much different.
So I think your discussion is going to help us answer that, don't you think? I mean, that the answer to that's probably more complex than this, that, or the other, right?
Well, yeah, I think it can. What is unfortunate though, I've been just going through data about flu season over time, and the information is so muddled. They're muddled for a lot of reasons. For people, I think, even when I look at what the CDC, the FDA, there are a number of reporting sources for seasonal flus and also the pandemic flus, but they all kind of have a different perspective on it and a different viewpoint. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but the main thing is they don't really do hardcore data evidence. Some years you have information, some years you don't. Some years they say, well, we just estimated it and we're not sure. You know, I have one statistic that showed, they said how many deaths was in the 2017 flu season. It was anywhere from 14,000 deaths to 60,000 deaths.
Oh,
So,
wow.
I mean, that's a pretty broad range. But it was all estimations, and then they go back a few years later and reassess their evaluation. So
you mean they don't test every single soul in the country 5, 10 different times during the season, like we did recently?
oh, this is only for the special COVID testing that we're doing this. No, they're not testing that way.
That's too bad. That's too bad.
Yeah.
Well, let me go ahead and let you take over. I don't know if you have slides for us or whatever, but how far back do you go? 1917 or what?
I did. I went back to 1918 to 20 is really when as far as US goes. And I'm going to really, what I'm going to do is just share a little bit of data. I don't have a lot of slides. I wasn't going to give information to stimulate a discussion and show some comparisons of what's been going on as far as the reporting when it comes to flus, seasonal flus or pandemic flus, because we're going to find out they're both kind of the same thing. It just depends on how widespread it is and how many deaths there are. But first, I want to say that, the original flus have been going on for 1,500 years. I mean, even in early Greek history, they reported having pandemics and flus then. But recently, as far as U.S. and the United States and worldwide, I think 1889 was one of the earliest ones. The earliest one reported we've seen in China was in the 1500s. But 1889 are what they call the modern flu season. And even then, there were reports, but they didn't have names for it or didn't know exactly what to call it. So they couldn't identify it that way.
So pretty much they just described it as what, upper respiratory tract infections or symptoms, or how there's just descriptions of clinical syndromes or what?
Yeah, even as early as the 1800s, they were describing the flu as a cholera or dengue fever. They looked at it more like a fever or a cholera or plague until they really were able to identify it as a flu. And that didn't really start happening until, I think, the 1889 pandemic that we saw.
So they called it the flu, the plagues, and these were previous health issues that had been described before. They were just describing the flu as the same thing.
Exactly, because they didn't have no way to identify it as a flu at that time.
But so, it's interesting that they did that. And will smell of sweet, etc. But it's interesting that they gave the description, because you would think, well, for instance, if somebody has dengue fever, they've got a systemic illness, they have fever, and maybe they have other things. And then let's say somebody has, a rash, or, let's say Stevens-Johnson syndrome where the skin stuff's off or whatever. That's a completely different presentation than systemic illness without any skin. So you would think that if something's given the same name as something else, the clinical syndrome would be similar. You know what I mean? In other words, if somebody has a fever, cough, and malaise, and you remember years ago, somebody with dengue fever or whatever having similar symptoms, then you would think that they would call it the same thing, even if they don't have a pathogen that's identified.
Right. Well, again, realize that when they were calling it those things, this was before 1900. So the physician population maybe not as versed as they should have been. And then you were getting reports from different places around the world. So I don't know if they were getting exactly the same information. So what happened was, as it spread it around the world, then it finally came to more populated areas. That's when they identified it as a flu. And I guess one of the determining factors was the respiratory. What I've seen in common is the respiratory insults that you see. Even up to the point of nosebleeds and eyes bleeding, breathing problems, difficulty breathing. Those have been the classic landmark signs of more of a respiratory type infection.
Gotcha. Wow, that's amazing. So moving into the 1917s, 1918s. Of course, we had the Spanish flu around that time, and that was probably was that the earliest well-documented flu that you found in the U.S. history?
And I'm ready to share some slides here. I have my screen on, and
okay.
Are you able to pull my screen share? It says blocked.
Oh, it shouldn't be.
Man, it says blocked.
Your screen share is blocked. There's no way.
Let me start again. Screen share, share screen, entire screen. It says Windows. It just says share.
I see it coming up now.
Now I'm back to this.
You're in. I see this. It shows you're sharing another computer.
Let me see. Okay, let me try it now. Let me stop this share and try it again. Okay, what do you see now?
There it is.
Okay, so let me start to get this show on the road. And this is basically some historical data on influenza viruses. And I really wanted just to focus on the virus because, I want to emphasize to our audience that the virus is what we really need to look at. And just looking back where we come from will give us a better clue of where we're going and what we can expect from what's going on with this current pandemic. And I kind of want to do a comparison of seasonal flus with the pandemic. And I was taking that position because I was looking for data about the seasonal flu for 2019 and 2020. That's the normal winter to spring data from 2019 to 2020. And there, I found out there was very little data or hardly any data because they were not tracking it. The COVID seemed to have just taken over everything for the 20 and the 2021. And so I'm still, and this is ongoing because I'm still waiting on the data to be released for the 2020 and 2021 flu season.
So there's no CDC data on influenza in 2021, 2020 rather.
Should be, and I'm going to share that estimate with you.
Okay.
That was the influenza pandemics we were talking about. That this is, and we see to the right side of this slide. It says the Spanish flu that was 1918 to 1920, commonly referred as the Spanish flu. And you hear that name. I remember that name is growing up as a child of Spanish flu. And I always thought that was something in Spain. I didn't know something was nationwide.
That started in the U.S. and we took it. I think our troops went overseas and.
yeah, and it is related to that too.
Yeah,
caused by an unusually severe, deadly influenza viral strain of H1N1 subtype. And I just want people to see the subtype H1N1 because this is in 1918, and H1N1 was still with us in 2009. It says currently estimated that 50 to 100 million people were killed worldwide. And this is why it was considered one of the worst pandemics of our time because of the number of the population that died from it. This pandemic killed mostly young people. 99% of the pandemic infected people under 65, and more than young adults were 20 to 40. And that was very unusual for in general because you always see seasonal flu or flu would affect people 65 and older. And then we go to the next. I'm just going to go through a little historical background here. Asian flu, that was 1957, 1958 when that outbreak occurred. And it was an avian flu, better known as a bird flu, originated in China. The original mutation was from wild ducks and combining with a pre-existing human strain of the virus. So you had a wild duck and a human strain of the virus coming together to make this flu so deadly. The death toll in the United States was approximately 116,000, which was raising to the level of pandemic. The elderly were particularly vulnerable. So it was more like a seasonal flu because it affected the elderly more. And the death toll was, about twice normal. Estimates of the worldwide death widely, very widely, depending on your source. Again, sources for all of this information has been very sketchy. So it says from 1 to 4 million people died. So that's a pretty broad range of how many people actually died. And then we go to our next one. This is showing the same things are going on. This is effective Wednesday, December 1968. Safeguards our patients during this present flu epidemic. This hospital has restricted visitors. And this was the Hong Kong flu. This was a sign they were putting up. So this was in 1968 that it was around. Again, the Hong Kong flu was caused by a strain of H3N2. And the numbers, the H numbers, are the only way to identify the flus, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Descendants. This was a descendant of the H2N2, and they call it an antigenic shift, in which the genes of multiple subtypes resorted to form a new virus. So the H1N1 is the original one, and then you have the H3N2, the H2N2. These are all variants, and I guess in today's terms, in the COVID term, we would call it a Delta variant. But these are variants of the original virus. But they call it an antigenic shift. The positive agent actually shifted and changed, and it reinvented itself. And so, just from this fact alone, it was showing even back then we had information to know this was happening and formed a new virus. So when we knew viruses, when we introduce new factors when it comes to circulating virus, we see that we can produce a totally new virus.
And these are from the original H1N1, which probably wasn't original. It may have mutated from something prior to what we knew.
Right, and I'm going to discuss that, how the H1N1, the fact that it's still around, that it never left. The viruses it's like a masquerade party. They put on a masquerade in 1 year, and they change it, and they change a little bit, and it comes back again. So the original viruses that have been here have never really left. They're not gone and done away with like you would assume. They estimate the Hong Kong flu killed between 1 and 4 million people. Again, this was an estimate because they don't have hard data. It was, and this is, most of this data I have here was either from CDC or a couple other organizations that collect this data, and also FDA's, and some of the data came from there too, because they do collection of data information. Those over 65, again, were the greatest, had the greatest number of deaths in the U.S., about 100,000 deaths. That was Hong Kong flu, 1968-69. And one point I want to make with the Hong Kong flu, this actually happened during the normal flu season, which was going into winter, into spring, so 68-69. And then we look at 1977 to 79. That's a 2-year, relatively benign flu pandemic, most affecting populations younger than 26 or 25. So that was an unusual situation also. It's estimated that 700,000 people died due to this pandemic worldwide. The cause was H1N1 viral strand, which was not seen after 1957, but it reappeared again in 1977 in China and in the Soviet Union. And the strange thing about this, that it was reported in the literature that it says genetic analysis and several unusual characteristics of the pandemic have prompted speculation that this virus was released into the public through a laboratory accident. So this was reported 30 years ago. So, these accidents keep occurring, and we keep getting these new strains of viruses. So just want to make a point again, the causative factor was the H1N1 was a original strand. And then we move up to 2009, 2010, which is most recent. This is a pandemic that I guess that most people our age and now really remember. I mean, I remember the Hong Kong flu and the Russian flu, but this one I really remember also because it was just barely 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago. The H1N1, and they call it H1N1 pandemic, but it's the same H1N1 that was responsible for the Spanish flu. Influenza-like illness known to cause of unknown cause, and it really appeared in April 2009, and it peaked in May and June. So it actually peaked going into the warmer months. Cases doubled by July, so it actually increased in July, And then they had a second wave that appeared in August and peaked in October. And all of this occurred, which is not your traditional flu season, because traditional flu season starts really in November and goes to February, March. This is a 3 to 4 month period as they consider the typical seasonal flu type thing. So this didn't fall in the category at all. Commonly referred to as a swine flu. It was officially declared by the WHO to be the first influenza pandemic of the 21st century, a new strain of the influenza A virus subtype H1N1. So again, this began with H1N1, but it's a whole new viral strain that has developed over time, estimated to have killed 284,500 deaths. People died. And finally, on this slide here, influenza A subtypes confirmed in humans. So these are a list of all the types of viruses that have been confirmed to be in humans. A lot of the viruses we have seen in the past were only in animals, or some in animals and in humans, but these are the ones we want to really focus on. The influenza A type virus. And maybe in a future talk, we'll talk about the difference between influenza A and influenza B and what that really means and how they classify them. But I didn't want to get down in the weeds too much. Influenza A virus subtypes have been confirmed in humans, ordered by the number of known pandemic deaths. So H1N1 is at the top of the list because it has caused more deaths than any of the other strains of the viruses. That's the Spanish flu was H1N1, the 1977 Russian flu was H1N1, and the 2009 swine flu pandemic was a novel H1N1. Then we had the H2N2, which is a offshoot of the they call it a antigenic shift or a drift, however you want to put it. But that was the Asian flu. The H1N3 was a Hong Kong flu. H3N2 was caused the Hong Kong flu. The H5N1 is a bird flu, an epidemic that began in the avian community. H7N7, zoonotic potential. That means it could cross into a number of animals. H1N2, currently epidemic in humans and pigs that we see right now. Now the H9, H7, H7N3, H10N7, what we find is those particular strands are not occurring in humans right now, but they're out there and they think they can make the jump at some time in the future. And this chart was a chart I pulled off that just gives a summation of what was going on.
I'm sorry, Doctor. So that last comment, I want to make sure you mentioned a few that is still zoonotic that can potentially make the jump. That's H7N7, H9N2, H7N2, H7N3, H1, H10N7. Those are ones, H1. Now, I want to point out to the audience that it's a real critical point you just made there. And Dr. Michael Greger, and what I'll do is I'll have to find a link to that talk. He also has a book, Bird Flu, where he talks about, these microorganisms, common cold, et cetera, all originate from domestication of animals.
Yes.
And the factory farming. I'm sure you're going to get into that, but it's interesting that, we study these and we know that they're in pigs. We're just waiting for them to make the leap to humans.
Yes.
So
well, we got the pigs, we got the ducks, and we have
common cold came from the horse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and that's a key point because it's a correlation. I haven't got any data that shows that we have anything from spinach or cauliflower or broccoli yet. It's some kind of correlation between animals and humans that causing these to arise, and I have to agree that it's a transfer. But part of it, and this goes into more of the virology portion, is that when we have viral components from animals mixing with viral components with humans, and then they form actually a whole new virus, and those are the ones that tend to attack humans and don't necessarily affect animals anymore, and they kind of go both ways. So it's a lot more research needs to be done, because once I started doing this research, I realized how many questions I had about what was going on and what not only we need to do, but the I guess the research agencies need to do to really get a handle on what's going on, because no matter what information they come up with, by the time it's published and widely distributed, things have changed. And
Yeah.
that's the whole what's been happening throughout history with the pandemics.
Now, did you find that some of these viruses go back and forth? They'll, let's say you get a flu season and maybe we develop some immunity, but some escape, go back to the animals, live there, mutate, and come back to humans. Have they described that kind of a process where it's a back and forth between animals and humans?
Well, they indicate that that's a possibility, but the research is not there. They haven't been able to document it, but they suppose that it's happened because of the way the viruses have mutated. Because the viruses I consider them so smart, and they change according to natural selection, the way I look at it, because they whatever environment allows them to express themselves, that's what they do. So if you have something like a vaccine or even an antiviral agent to use on them, they will adjust to accommodate that agent and to keep on living. So whether it's to go back to an animal or whether it's to mutate into something different. I want to finish this last slide here. It says a major modern influence of pandemics, and we're just talking about pandemics here. And on the left column are the names of it. Now, the 1889 to 1890 flu pandemic, it wasn't really a name for that, but that was a pandemic that took place. It said it was 1.5 billion people worldwide was affected by that. But they estimate the worldwide deaths to be around 1 million, depending on how you look at it. And you can see under the infected data here, they talk about that. But in these kind of charts, basically what I looked at was the worldwide deaths to get an idea of how lethal it was, and also in the subtype column, what was the underlying cause, what was the underlying virus that was there, and you can see the next column, the Spanish flu, that's 1918, 1.8 billion, H1N1, and they're estimating what they 17 to 100 million deaths. And so the numbers to me don't add up. If I have to make a range that big, it's really a guesstimation they're making here. If they said from 17 to 100 billion deaths, to 100 million deaths, excuse me. Asian flu, H1N2, 1 to 4 million deaths. Hong Kong flu, same kind of numbers, 1 to 4 million deaths. In 1977, you had the Russian flu, that's at 0.7. That was a mild example here. And then in 2009, 2010, it's H1N1, another variant of H1N1. But you can see the number here that it supposedly 6.85 billion were affected in the worldwide population, but we only had 151,000 to 500,000 deaths over the period of time that it was expressing itself. And then you compare the bottom of a typical seasonal flu every year is when we see it. It says it affects 7.75 billion. And that number, I have to really do research because I don't know how they came with that number. If there's only barely 8 billion people on the planet, so it's in everybody on the planet was basically gets the seasonal flu, which I'm not sure about that. But H1N1, H3N2 are the two subtypes affected by it. And they see approximately 290 to 650,000 deaths per year. So that's what the seasonal flu is doing.
Oh, wow.
So making a distinction between and these other pandemics is really the challenge. Let me give you a little bit more history about seasonal flu. It says key issues showing how the vaccine has evolved to match the evolution of its influence of viruses. So in a seasonal flu, 90% of the people affected are over 65. So we see that's why they always advocate older adults getting the vaccine. And approximately 56,000 deaths per year is the average of how many people die of just a seasonal flu. So when we see the numbers, where I even in the COVID statistics, I want to know where the 56,000 average is, because they have been more, but they have been less. And then I just pulled some examples out. I was looking at the CDC's data and FDA's data, and it was another organization, I don't have the name in front of me, that they pulled data on deaths. And so in 2012-13 season, the seasonal flu deaths were around 43,000. In 17-18, 51,000. 18-19 was a light year, 34,000. Then we go to 2019, 2020, 62,000. But again, the CDC, when they put the 62,000 number, they said they actually said on their website, and you can go look at for yourself, that we don't actually count the deaths, but we estimate what the deaths would be just based on data.
Is that including COVID? They don't count the COVID deaths either?
Well, see, in the 1920, they didn't really count the COVID there because I guess COVID started the first quarter of the year in March when they first started recording data. But I don't have a number for the seasonal flu for the November, December, and in the year of 2021 yet. Or really, you know, here that 62,000 for 2019, but I don't know when it declared the end of the 2020 seasonal flu over. If it was over in February and March, well, COVID was already moving up in February and March. So, like I said, the data is muddled again, so we don't know exactly what it is until someone really goes through the weeds and figure it out. Now, I've been working on this about several days, trying to come to some idea of what the real number is, but I haven't been able to do it yet. And I haven't stopped, so I'm still on it. Influenza virus was first isolated 80 years ago in 1933. That's the first time they really isolated the virus to see what it was. The first influenza vaccine. And this is, well, I don't need to go through this. I want to go through this later. But this is information on the relationship of the virus to the vaccine. And we could talk about that a little bit later, but I really want to focus on the virus and people to understand that the virus that we experience today are really the same virus in a different form. And they really haven't changed that much. So when we see something really dramatically different, and throughout history it's been that way. So when we see something dramatically different, it makes me suspicious on the origin of where it came from.
So let me ask you this then. So the seasonal flu that we get year in and year out, is that the distant cousin or distant relative of the H1N1, world killer in the Spanish flu?
It is. Because they even said that the H1N1 is now a seasonal flu, because what happens at H1N goes into the mix of what causes seasonal flus, because they don't go anywhere. And they said they even had some predictions on some websites, governmental websites, that talks about viruses and vaccines, and other researchers about in years to come, COVID will be a seasonal flu, because it may not be as deadly or as contagious, but it gets mixed in and gets diluted by other vaccines or other flu viruses. So, things we're doing are changing the virus. And by changing the virus, you come up with new symptoms and new outcomes. So, yeah, H1 is a seasonal flu. The bird flu is a part of the seasonal flu. When we talk about the West Nile virus and all these other viruses that we've heard about in the past, they all are part of the seasonal flu.
And is it typical that these viruses, I mean, in my recollection of studying them in both in school and also in clinical practice, that they typically progress to a less virulent pathogen, more contagious, less virulent? That's the trade-off. It may start off as fairly virulent, and I think you get a spectrum of viruses that all clones necessarily. So the subtypes that are more virulent, they'll die off. And the subtypes that are less virulent, they'll hang around and they'll continue to spread. So as you get the virus living with us longer, it's less virulent, more contagious, which is what we're seeing with COVID and the mutations.
Yes. And I think that's a good summation. And more contagious, and that's true. And I think that's relative to, because when you do other things to prevent the transmission of the other strains, it allows the strains that's unabated to just go wild. So it seems to be more contagious because it's no defense against that, because your body hasn't created a defense against it, or antibody for it. So it really goes wild. But it will be usually less virulent, for that reason. So
if I took your slides down, if you have any other things you want to show, I'll bring it up. So I think there's several great points you raised. The history of the flu pandemics is fairly muddled because the data is not very strong.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna, after the break, I want to comment on that whole aspect of data collection, because that's an important point. That's one. Two, The other take home is as the viruses mutate, they become less virulent, more contagious, and they start to live with us in our environment. And I think that's an important take home message for our population, because it really gets to the ultimate way in which we deal with these viruses. So that's the other thing. And it's interesting that there was some suggestion of a leak from a lab, decades ago.
Yes.
Where we're still talking about this same type of thing now.
Yeah.
Mutations, as we know, happen in the wild, within animals and within humans, and then of course there are mutations that can happen in the laboratory that are manufactured, and so all of these have an impact on these viruses that we see from time to time. So what I'd like to do after the break is come and have a discussion on this. Those of you in the chat room, I hope you kind of take hold of some of these messages and come back on the other side and raise some questions. I'm going to raise a couple of points myself, because I think it's really, really important to sort of look at this historical perspective and step back and look at it from a big picture, because it's easy to come into a situation where we say, okay, COVID's got a mutation and the news is saying this, that, and the other. And we really don't know what's happening, because we're just sort of thinking about this from a here and now perspective. But if we step back and look at a historical perspective, I think history can teach us about how these things normally behave and how we should react to them. So let's take a quick break, and we'll get into this discussion on the other side. So clearly, with the viruses, they mutate, and let's take that historical perspective. Viruses come in, they have a certain level of virulence. A good number of people get very ill and die, and then we develop some population immunity to that sub. Greetings, I'm Dr. Batcher Montgomery. Thanks for joining us this evening. I want to share information about our FoodRx Healthy Lifestyle Series. The FoodRx Healthy Lifestyle Series is a comprehensive health and wellness coaching program designed to help you navigate your lifestyle towards optimal health. Do you want to reverse or control a chronic illness, or reduce or eliminate medications? You may want to avoid potential surgeries or medical procedures, or perhaps boost your immune system or improve your fitness level, or much more. The program starts with an intense 5-session, 4-week virtual coaching jumpstart phase, where you join a group of like-minded individuals dedicated to improving their health. You'll be provided a lot of support materials, including nutrition plans, recipes, supplement plans as needed, or fitness plans, and much more. You have full-year access to the support materials as well as our health and wellness team during and at the completion of the 4-week jumpstart period. To learn more about this program, connect on one of our links below or schedule a call with our team members. Let them know if you wish to speak to me directly, and they'll arrange a time for you. Optimal health is a lifelong journey. Let us help you navigate it to your most desired destination.